Do you need religion to make people moral? Let's find out. Some say religion is the foundation of morality, but philosophers dispute it. In fact, they strongly emphasize that ethics can exist independent of religion. And today's session, we'll discuss this issue. We will try to understand the connection between ethics and religion. We'll try to understand, can religion contribute to morality? We'll explore this question, can secular ethics and religion exist together? So stay tuned, you will find a lot of answers to this question. Let's start by understanding briefly the relationship between ethics and religion. Religious scholars insist that religion is the foundation of morality. But philosophers question it by saying ethics existed much before organized religion. For example, ancient Greek ethics. Similarly, the philosophers also point out that ethics is not based on faith. Ethics is based on reasoning and rational justification, and one can be moral without following any religion. And lastly, this is the key argument philosophers present, that religious doctrine differ on moral issues. Despite these differences, religion and ethics kind of overlap. For example, both religion and ethics tries to answer basic moral questions. They try to talk about sense of purpose in life. They even try to talk about how to live a good life. And both emphasize on values such as honesty, kindness, and compassion. So there is a kind of overlap. That's why it's quite tricky to explore this issue of relationship between ethics and religion. Let's proceed to understand the differences between ethics and religion in a detailed manner. The first big difference where both ethics and religion differ is source of authority. Religious codes or religious morality is completely based on divine authority, while ethics is not based on divine authority. It exists independently of divine authority, and it's based on thinking, critical reasoning, and rationality. Religious systems prohibit murder and theft on the basis of divine authority. Similarly, secular ethics also prohibits murder and theft not on the basis of divine authority. But they believe that killing somebody or taking life undermines social harmony. In the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac, God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son. From a religious perspective, Abraham's act of obedience was seen as act of faith. But philosophers will have a different question. Philosophers raise this question, is it ethical to follow a command that violates the basic principles of human morality? So in other words, in religion, everything is about unquestionable faith. Whereas in ethics, since it's based on rational inquiry, we encourage questioning. Speaking of questioning, in religion, the moral rules are absolute and one has to follow them unquestioningly because they are divinely ordained. Whereas in ethics, since it's based on rational inquiry, it encourages debate, it encourages questioning. For example, let's take the issue of slavery. In the past, some religious systems accepted slavery as morally permissible. But on the other side, secular ethics questioned it, and that's why later slavery was abolished. Now the big question, can ethics exist without religion? I would love to hear your thoughts here. If you go by religious scholars, they are very emphatic that without God, without religion, there can be no ethics. Why? Because God is the foundation of all morality. In fact, they even point out that secular societies have no moral foundation at all. But philosophers have some interesting counter-arguments here. So let's see how philosophers argue their case. Let me bring in Plato here. He questioned the religious perspective with this very interesting statement. Is something moral because God commands it, or God commands it because it is moral? Plato's statement raises a very interesting philosophical dilemma. If morality depends on God's will, then morality is too arbitrary, because God can declare anything moral. The second part, if moral principles existed independently of God, that means we can discover those principles by using our human reason. In today's world, many ethical systems are absolutely secular, completely built on human reason and shared values without appealing to any religious authority. For example, let's take Kantian ethics. It completely revolves around rules, principles, duties. Let's take Unitarianism. They completely believe in something called greater good. Thereby, in today's world, secular societies demonstrate very clearly that ethical behavior does not need any religious foundation. Let's keep philosophers aside and let me ask you a common sense question. Do you think religion can contribute to ethics? A simple question. What do you say? If you ask me, yes, it does contribute. For example, the very first thing religion does is it provides you a moral code. If you look at all religions, they have moral codes, and all these codes guide human beings in terms of how to make decisions when it comes to personal life, how to make decisions in situations of ethical dilemmas, how to make decisions while making life choices. So in other words, these moral codes also guide human beings by telling them what is right and what is wrong and how to behave in a concrete situation. Now here's an interesting contribution. Religion motivates moral behavior. Religion promises something called reward, divine reward, or at the same time divine punishment. That's heaven and hell. Religion as a collective encourages a sense of community among followers. And this sense of community among followers is built on values such as compassion, altruism, and service. And practicing these values not only encourages ethical behavior among followers, it also ensures that the followers work for collective welfare of everyone. Religion can also strengthen morality by offering a sense of meaning or purpose in life for its adherents, which thereby encourages the followers to live a life which is morally upright, all in pursuit of a divine cosmic plan. Now, a question to explore. Can religion and secular ethics coexist? I'll bring in Kevin Gibson here. In fact, he gives 3 ways religion and secular ethics can coexist together. Even religious believers can engage in ethical philosophy without giving up their religious faith. Similarly, secular philosophers can also learn something from religious moral codes without adopting the religious faith. An ethical dialogue between secular philosophers and religious scholars can actually encourage tolerance, can actually encourage a spirit of understanding. Human rights movements, anti-slavery or women's rights or civil rights movement, all of them have involved religious scholars also and secular philosophers also, thereby demonstrating very effectively that religious scholars and secular philosophers can coexist and work together. Ethical progress happens by dialogue, not by rigid adherence to one single moral code. Therefore, Kevin Gibson very effectively points out that religion and secular ethics can actually go hand in hand and actually mutually reinforce each other also in multiple ways. Final thoughts. In a world filled with conflicting voices, religious, social, cultural, the real ethical challenge is not about taking a side. The challenge is to listen, understand, question, and decide how to be moral. So long, happy learning.